The sun was going down behind the trees in Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. It was one of those evenings where everything seemed calm, almost too calm. The air smelled like freshly cut grass, and the sound of birds chirping had faded into silence. 9-year-old Lily Harper was outside her family's home, enjoying what felt like the last bit of summer before school started again. Her parents were inside, busy cooking dinner, trusting that she would stay. Close to the house, Lily loved spending time outdoors. There was something magical about the way the world looked when the sun began to set. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and the light made everything glow softly. Today, she was playing fetch with Max, the family dog. Max was a golden retriever, friendly and loyal, always eager to please. He wagged his tail whenever Lily threw the tennis ball, bounding after it with boundless energy. But today, something felt different about Max. At first, Lily didn't notice anything unusual. She tossed the ball, and he ran after it, just like he always did. But when he came back, instead of dropping the ball at her feet, he held onto it tightly, his dark eyes fixed on her face. His body was stiff, and his ears were pointed forward. It wasn't the playful posture she was used to seeing. "Come on, Max," Lily said, reaching out to take the ball from him. "Give it here." Max hesitated for a moment before finally letting go. He dropped the ball, but instead of sitting patiently or waiting for her to throw it again, he stepped back. His lips curled upward slightly, revealing sharp white teeth. For a second, Lily thought maybe he was just being silly. He sometimes liked to pretend he was tough, but then she saw his hackles rise along his spine. That's when fear crept into her chest. "Max," she whispered, taking a step backward. Her voice trembled, though she tried to sound brave. "What's wrong?" The dog didn't respond. Instead, he let out a low growl, deep and guttural, unlike any sound Lily had ever heard him make before. It sent shivers down her spine. She glanced toward the house, hoping her mom or dad would come outside and see what was happening. But the front door remained closed and no one appeared. Lily took another cautious step back, clutching the tennis ball tightly in her hand. She wanted to call out for help, but her throat felt dry, and the words wouldn't form. Max continued to stare at her, his head lowered, his muscles tense. Every instinct told her to run, but she couldn't move. Fear rooted her to the spot, and then it happened. With startling speed, Max lunged forward, his jaws snapping shut around Lily's arm. Pain exploded through her body, sharp and searing. She screamed louder than she ever had in her life, the sound piercing through the stillness of the evening. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she tried to pull away, but Max's grip was strong. His teeth sank deeper into her flesh and blood began to soak through her sleeve. Inside the house, Karen Harper was chopping vegetables for dinner when she heard her daughter's scream. At first, she thought it might be part of their game. Kids often got carried away while playing. But then she realized how desperate and frightened Lily sounded. Dropping the knife onto the counter, Karen rushed outside, her heart pounding in her chest. When she saw what was happening, her stomach dropped. Max, the same dog who had been part of their family for years, the same dog who slept at the foot of Lily's bed every night, was attacking her. Without thinking, Karen grabbed a broom leaning against the side of the house and ran toward them. "Max, stop!" she shouted, swinging the broom handle to push him away. The dog released Lily's arm with a snarl, backing off a few steps. His eyes were wild, darting between Karen and Lily as if confused by the sudden interruption. Karen quickly scooped Lily into her arms, cradling her protectively. "It's okay, sweetheart," Karen murmured, trying to soothe her sobbing daughter. "You're safe now." Blood dripped steadily from Lily's wound, staining Karen's shirt. She knew they needed medical attention right away. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation as calmly as she could manage. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens filled the air, growing louder as an ambulance approached. Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Some stood silently, watching with wide eyes, while others whispered among themselves. Everyone knew Max. He was a regular presence in the neighborhood, often seen trotting alongside Lily during their walks. No one could understand why he would suddenly turn violent. As paramedics loaded Lily into the ambulance, Karen climbed in beside her, holding her hand tightly. She couldn't stop replaying the scene in her mind. The growl, the lunge, the look in Max's eyes. Something about it didn't feel right. This wasn't normal aggression. It was as if some unseen force had taken control of him. Back at the house, Max sat alone in the yard, his head bowed low. His breathing was heavy, and his body shook as if he were struggling against an invisible weight. When Karen returned later that night, exhausted and emotionally drained, she found him lying in the same spot. He didn't greet her like he usually did. Instead, he stared blankly ahead, his expression unreadable. Karen knelt beside him, running her fingers gently through his fur. "What's wrong with you, boy?" she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "What happened?" Max didn't respond. He simply lay there, unmoving, as if weighed down by guilt or something darker. Whatever had caused him to attack Lily, Karen knew this wasn't over. Something strange was happening, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it was only the beginning. The hospital was quiet except for the hum of machines and the occasional sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. Lily lay on a bed in a small room, her arm wrapped tightly in bandages. Her eyes were red from crying, but she had finally stopped, sobbing. Karen sat beside her, holding her hand gently, trying to comfort her daughter as best she could. "Are you feeling any better?" Karen asked softly, brushing a strand of hair away from Lily's face. Lily nodded slightly but didn't say anything. She kept clutching her stuffed bear close to her chest, as if it could protect her from whatever had happened earlier that evening. Doctors had cleaned and dressed her wound, giving her medicine to prevent infection. They assured Karen that Lily would heal physically but emotionally. The scars might take longer to fade. Karen couldn't stop thinking about Max. She replayed the attack over and over in her mind, searching for answers. Why had he done it? What had caused him to turn so violently against Lily? These questions haunted her, making it impossible to focus on anything else. When they returned home late that night, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. The warm and welcoming atmosphere they had always known seemed replaced by an unsettling tension. As soon as they walked inside, Karen noticed Max sitting in the corner of the living room. His head was lowered, and his tail wasn't wagging like it usually did when they came home. He looked up briefly as they entered, but there was no joy in his eyes, only a strange emptiness. Karen sighed deeply, unsure of what to do with him. She decided to lock him in the laundry room for the night, just to be safe. "I'm sorry, Max," she said quietly as she closed the door behind her. "I don't know what's wrong with you, but I can't risk letting you near Lily right now." Upstairs, Ethan, Lily's older brother, was lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling. At 14, Ethan liked to think of himself as tough and fearless, but tonight he couldn't shake the image of Max attacking his little sister. It didn't make sense. Max had always been gentle, almost like another member of the family. So why had he snapped? Ethan tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Around midnight, he heard a low growl coming from downstairs. Curious, and maybe a little scared, he got out of bed and tiptoed down the stairs. The growling grew louder as he approached the laundry room. Peering through the gap under the door, he saw Max pacing back and forth, his body tense and rigid. His ears were perked up and his eyes darted around the room as if he were looking for something or someone. "What are you doing, boy?" Ethan whispered, opening the door just a crack. Max froze, turning his head sharply toward the sound of Ethan's voice. For a moment, their eyes met, and Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. There was something unnatural about the way Max was behaving, something that went beyond simple aggression or fear. Deciding not to disturb him further, Ethan closed the door again and went into the living room. He sat on the couch, staring out the window at the empty street outside. Everything seemed normal at first glance. The streetlights glowed softly, casting pools of light onto the pavement. But then he noticed something odd. Standing beneath one of the lampposts was a man in a dark coat. His face was hidden in shadow, but Ethan could tell he was watching the house. "Who's that?" Ethan muttered to himself, leaning closer to the glass. The figure didn't move, just stood there, silently as if waiting for something. After a few minutes, Ethan blinked, and when he looked again, the man was gone. Confused and more than a little freaked out, Ethan went back upstairs and climbed into bed. But sleep wouldn't come easily. His mind raced with questions. Who was that man? And what did he want? Most importantly, could he have something to do with Max's strange behavior? The next morning, Karen called Dr. Alan Hayes, a local veterinarian who specialized in animal behavior. By early afternoon, Dr. Hayes arrived at the Harper house, carrying a bag filled with tools and supplies. He greeted Karen warmly before asking to see Max. "He's in the laundry room," Karen explained, leading him to the locked door. "He's been acting weird." Dr. Hayes nodded thoughtfully and stepped inside. Max was lying in the corner, his head resting on his paws. When he saw the vet, he let out a low whine but didn't get up. Dr. Hayes knelt beside him, examining him carefully. He checked Max's eyes, ears, and mouth, looking for signs of illness or injury. Then he ran some basic tests, taking samples of blood and fur. "Well?" Karen asked anxiously after about 30 minutes. "Is he sick?" Dr. Hayes shook his head slowly. "There's nothing medically wrong with him," he said, frowning. "His vitals are strong and all the tests came back normal. But..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've never seen anything quite like this before. It's almost like he's not acting on instinct anymore. Something seems off." Karen's heart sank. If Max wasn't sick, then what was causing his behavior? She thanked Dr. Hayes for coming and walked him to the door. Once he left, she leaned against the wall, feeling overwhelmed. This wasn't just about Max anymore. It was about keeping her family safe. Later that day, Ethan decided to dig deeper. He borrowed Karen's laptop and started researching unusual animal behavior. At first, he found plenty of articles about aggressive dogs and territorial instincts, but none of them explained what was happening with Max. Frustrated, he expanded his search, typing keywords like supernatural and possessed animals. To his surprise, he stumbled across a forum discussing strange occurrences involving pets turning violent without explanation. One post caught his attention. A user named Shadow Watcher described how their cat had suddenly attacked them after weeks of acting strangely. The attack stopped only after they performed a ritual involving salt and candles. Another commenter mentioned seeing shadowy figures lurking near their house shortly before their dog began behaving aggressively. Ethan scrolled through the thread, reading story after story. Each one sounded eerily similar to what was happening with Max. Could these people be onto something? Was it possible that something supernatural was influencing Max? Determined to find answers, Ethan texted his best friend, Jake Thompson, asking if he wanted to help investigate. Jake agreed immediately, intrigued by the mystery. Together they made plans to keep watch that night, hoping to catch whatever or whoever was affecting Max. As the sun set once again, Ethan and Jake settled into the living room, armed with flashlights and a bag of salt they'd bought from the grocery store earlier that day. They dimmed the lights and waited, listening for any unusual sounds. Max was still locked in the laundry room, but his growls carried through the walls, growing louder as the hours passed. Around midnight, the growling stopped abruptly. Ethan exchanged a nervous glance with Jake. "Do you think he's okay?" Jake whispered. Before Ethan could answer, they heard a faint scratching noise coming from the laundry room. Slowly, they crept toward the door, flashlights in hand. When they peeked inside, they found Max crouched in the corner, staring fixedly at the window. His body trembled, and his lips curled back in a silent snarl. "What's he looking at?" Jake murmured, shining his flashlight toward the window. Ethan followed the beam of light and gasped. Outside, standing beneath the same street lamp as the night before, was the man in the dark coat. This time his face was partially visible, a pale, gaunt visage with hollow eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. He raised a hand, pointing directly at the house. Ethan's heart raced. "We need to do something," he said, grabbing the bag of salt. "Now." Without hesitation, he sprinkled a line of salt across the threshold of the laundry room, creating a barrier between Max and the rest of the house. The dog flinched, backing away from the salt as if it burned him. Outside, the man tilted his head, watching them through the window. Then, with a flicker of movement, he vanished into thin air. Jake let out a shaky breath. "What was that?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, his voice trembling. "But I think we're dealing with something bigger than we realized." For the rest of the night, neither of them slept. They stayed awake, keeping watch over Max in the house, determined to protect their family from whatever forces were at play. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to hurt Lily or anyone else again. The next morning, Ethan woke up feeling exhausted but determined. He hadn't slept much after the strange encounter with the shadowy figure the night before. Jake had gone home around dawn, leaving Ethan to think about what they had seen and what it might mean. The memory of the man's glowing eyes lingered in his mind like a bad dream he couldn't shake off. Ethan knew they needed more answers. Whatever was happening wasn't normal, and it went beyond Max's behavior. It was as if something or someone was manipulating him from the outside. But how? And why? After breakfast, Ethan decided to search the house for clues. His parents were busy comforting Lily, who still refused to talk about the attack. Karen had taken her to see a therapist later that afternoon, so Ethan had some time to himself. He started in the attic, a place he rarely visited, but remembered hearing stories about from his grandparents. They used to say the attic was full of old family belongings, including journals and books passed down through generations. When he opened the creaky wooden door, a rush of stale air greeted him. Dust particles floated lazily in the beam of sunlight, streaming through a small window. The attic was cluttered with boxes, furniture covered in white sheets, and shelves lined with forgotten treasures. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and began rummaging through the piles. It didn't take long to find something interesting. Hidden beneath a stack of old photo albums was a leather-bound journal with faded gold lettering on the cover. Harper Family Records. Curious, Ethan flipped it open. Inside were handwritten notes, sketches, and newspaper clippings dating back decades. Most of it seemed random at first glance. Recipes, weather records, even a list of chores. But then he stumbled upon a section labeled Strange Happenings. One entry caught his eye. March 12, 1947. Strange noises heard coming from the woods near Willow Creek. Animals acting oddly, dogs barking all night without cause. Townsfolk claim to have seen shadowy figures moving among the trees. Some believe it to be the Watchers, spirits said to observe humanity and sow chaos. Father performed a ritual using salt and fire to ward them off. No sightings since. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Could this be connected to what was happening now? He read the entry again, trying to make sense of it. The description of shadowy figures matched what he and Jake had seen outside their house, and the mention of animals behaving strangely sounded eerily familiar. He continued flipping through the journal, finding more entries about similar events over the years. Each time, the solution involved rituals or protective measures to keep the Watchers away. Ethan felt a mix of fear and excitement. If these legends were true, maybe they could use the same methods to stop whatever was influencing Max. Determined to try, Ethan gathered supplies mentioned in the journal: salt, candles, and herbs like sage and lavender. He also found an old book titled Protection Against Unseen Forces, which contained detailed instructions for creating barriers against supernatural entities. Armed with this newfound knowledge, he called Jake to come over and help. By evening, the two boys were ready. They set up everything in the attic, lighting candles and drawing protective symbols on the floor in chalk. Max, who had been locked in the laundry room all day, was brought upstairs under strict supervision. Ethan sprinkled a circle of salt around them, ensuring no gaps in the barrier. "Do you really think this will work?" Jake asked nervously, glancing at Max. The dog sat quietly, his ears perked up as if listening to something far away. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. But we have to try. If this thing is controlling Max, we need to break its hold. They opened the old book and began reading aloud the incantations written inside. The words felt awkward and unfamiliar, but they followed the instructions carefully. As they chanted, the candles flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. A cold breeze swept through the attic, though none of the windows were open. Suddenly, Max let out a low growl. His body tensed, and his eyes darted around the room. Outside, the sound of footsteps echoed faintly, growing louder with each passing second. Ethan and Jake exchanged worried glances. Were they making things worse? Then, without warning, the temperature dropped sharply. Frost formed on the edges of the windows, and the air grew heavy with an oppressive silence. In the corner of the room, shadows began to twist and writhe, forming a humanoid shape. Its features were indistinct, but its presence was undeniable. "You shouldn't meddle in matters you don't understand," a raspy voice hissed, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Ethan swallowed hard, clutching the flashlight tightly. "Leave us alone," he shouted, shining the light directly at the shadow. For a moment, the figure recoiled, its form flickering like smoke. Encouraged, Ethan repeated the chant louder, his voice steady despite his fear. Jake joined, in their combined voices filling the attic. The shadow writhed violently, letting out an ear-piercing screech. Then, with a final burst of energy, it dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind only silence. For several minutes, neither boy spoke. They stared at the empty space where the shadow had been, waiting to see if it would return. Max relaxed visibly, lying down with a soft whine. His eyes closed and his breathing slowed, as if a great weight had been lifted from him. Did we do it?" Jake finally asked, breaking the silence. "I think so," Ethan replied, exhaling deeply, "but I'm not sure if it's over for good." They cleaned up the attic, erasing the chalk symbols and blowing out the candles. Max followed them downstairs, wagging his tail for the first time in days. It was as if he had returned to his old self, the friendly, loyal dog they all loved. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the shadowy figure and the warning it had given. Was it truly gone or just waiting for another chance to strike? He decided to keep researching, determined to learn everything he could about the Watchers and how to protect his family. The next day, life in the Harper household began to return to normal, or as close to normal as possible. Karen noticed a change in Max's behavior and cautiously allowed him back into the main living areas. Lily still clung to her stuffed bear, but she smiled more often, especially when Max rested his head on her lap. Despite the apparent calm, Ethan remained vigilant. He shared what he had learned with Jake, and together they vowed to stay prepared. They stocked up on salt, candles, and protective charms, hiding them throughout the house. Every night they checked the windows and doors, making sure the house was secure. Karen and Lily's father, David, remained unaware of the supernatural elements at play. To them, Max's sudden aggression was simply an anomaly, perhaps triggered by stress or illness. While Ethan considered telling them the truth, he worried they wouldn't believe him, or worse, dismiss it as nonsense. As autumn approached, the Yosen leaves began to fall, painting the neighborhood in shades of red and gold. Life in Willow Creek carried on as usual, but whispers of strange occurrences lingered in the community. Other families reported pets acting unusually, or seeing shadowy figures lurking nearby. Some dismissed these stories as superstition, while others quietly reinforced their homes with protective measures. For Ethan and Lily, the experience served as a stark reminder that the world held mysteries beyond comprehension, and sometimes, even the most innocent creatures could become conduits for darkness. They promised to stay watchful, knowing that peace was fragile and shadows could return at any moment. Though the immediate threat seemed to have passed, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the Watchers weren't gone forever. Somewhere, out there, hidden in the corners of the world, they waited, and when the time was right, they would strike again. The days following the attic ritual were quiet, too quiet. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching and waiting. Max seemed back to his old self, wagging his tail and playing fetch like nothing had happened. But Ethan noticed subtle changes in the dog's behavior. Sometimes, late at night, Max would sit by the window staring intently at the street as if expecting someone or something to appear. Ethan shared his concerns with Jake during one of their daily meetings. They had taken to meeting after school, in the garage, where they could talk without interruptions. Jake brought snacks while Ethan spread out notes and sketches he had made based on his research. Together, they pieced together fragments of information about the Watchers, trying to understand their motives and how to protect themselves. "I think we scared them off for now," Jake said, biting into a granola bar. "But what if they come back? What if they're stronger next time?" Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "That's why we need to learn more. We can't just rely on salt circles and chance. If these things are real, and I think they are, we need to be ready for anything." They decided to explore further, venturing beyond books and online forums. Ethan remembered hearing stories from his grandparents about strange happenings in Willow Creek's woods. People claimed to see shadowy figures, lurking among the trees, or hear whispers carried by the wind. These tales were dismissed as local legends, but Ethan wondered if there was truth behind them. On a Friday afternoon after finishing their homework, Ethan and Jake set out for the woods. They packed flashlights, notebooks, and supplies like salt and candles just in case. The air was crisp and the sky was overcast, casting long shadows across the ground. Leaves crunched underfoot as they walked deeper into the forest, guided only by the narrow beam of their flashlights. "Do you really think we'll find something?" Jake asked, glancing nervously around. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The deeper they went, the darker it became until even the sound of birdsong faded away. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But this place has been mentioned in almost every story about the Watchers. If there's any truth to those legends, maybe we'll find clues here." As they moved farther into the woods, the temperature dropped noticeably. A thin layer of frost covered the fallen leaves, and their breath formed clouds in the chilly air. Suddenly, Ethan stopped, shining his flashlight ahead. There, etched into the bark of a large oak tree, was a symbol, a circle surrounded by jagged lines resembling something he had seen in the Harper family journal. "Look at this," Ethan whispered, tracing the carving with his fingers. It felt rough and ancient, as if it had been there for decades. Beside it were other markings, some faded with time, others clearer. Each one seemed to tell a story, though Ethan couldn't decipher their exact meaning. Jake snapped pictures with his phone, hoping to analyze them later. "What do you think they mean?" he asked, stepping closer to examine another symbol. "I'm not sure," Ethan replied, "but they look similar to the ones we drew in the attic. Maybe they're warnings or protections." They continued exploring, finding more carvings scattered throughout the forest. Some were accompanied by piles of stones arranged in deliberate patterns, while others stood alone, isolated and mysterious. As they documented each discovery, Ethan felt a growing sense of unease. The woods didn't feel empty. Instead, they felt alive, as if countless unseen eyes were watching their every move. Then, without warning, the wind picked up, swirling leaves and sending a chill down their spines. The flashlights flickered, dimming briefly before returning to full brightness. Ethan grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him closer. "Something's here," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. From the shadows emerged faint shapes, tall, humanoid figures cloaked in darkness. Their eyes glowed faintly, shifting between green and red, and their movements were unnaturally smooth, almost floating rather than walking. They didn't speak, but their presence radiated menace. "Stay behind me," Ethan instructed, fumbling in his backpack for the salt. He quickly poured a line in front of them, creating a barrier. The figures hesitated, hovering near the edge of the salt circle. Their glowing eyes locked onto the boys, studying them intently. "What are they doing?" Jake whispered, clutching his flashlight tightly. "They're testing us," Ethan replied, trying to see if we'll break. Summoning his courage, Ethan opened the leather-bound book he had brought along. Flipping to a marked page, he began reciting another chant, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. Jake joined in, their voices blending together as they repeated the ancient words. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the figures began to retreat, dissolving into the fog like smoke dispersing in the wind. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by the familiar sounds of nature, the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. When the last of the figures vanished, Ethan let out a shaky breath. That was too close. Jake nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead. Yeah, no kidding. Do you think they're gone for good? I doubt it, Ethan said grimly. These things aren't going to give up that easily. This was just a test. Next time, they might be stronger. They gathered their belongings and hurried back toward the edge of the woods. By the time they reached the safety of the neighborhood, the sun had begun to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Exhausted but relieved, they parted ways, promising to meet again soon to continue their preparations. Back home, Ethan found Lily sitting on the couch with Max curled up beside her. She smiled when she saw him, but there was still a hint of sadness in her eyes. Despite everything, she refused to talk about the attack, retreating into herself whenever the topic arose. Karen hovered nearby, offering gentle encouragement, but progress was slow. That night, Ethan lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with questions. Who or what were the Watchers? Why had they targeted Max? And most importantly, how could they stop them permanently? He knew they couldn't face this threat alone. While he trusted Jake implicitly, they needed help from someone who understood the supernatural world better than they did. The next morning, Ethan scoured the internet for experts or groups specializing in paranormal phenomena. After hours of searching, he stumbled upon a forum dedicated to investigating unexplained events. One user, calling themselves Guardian Light, claimed to have first-hand experience dealing with entities like the Watchers. Taking a chance, Ethan sent a private message explaining their situation. To his surprise, Guardian Light responded within minutes, asking for more details. Over the course of several exchanges, they revealed themselves to be a retired professor named Dr. Emily Grant, who had spent years researching folklore and mythology. Intrigued by Ethan's story, she agreed to visit Willow Creek and assist them. A week later, Dr. Grant arrived at the Harper house. She was an older woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, carrying a satchel filled with books and tools. Ethan introduced her to Karen and David, explaining that she was there to help figure out what had happened to Max. Though skeptical, they welcomed her warmly, eager for any answers she might provide. Dr. Grant wasted no time getting to work. She examined the attic, studied the symbols carved into the oak tree, and listened carefully to Ethan and Jake's accounts of their encounters. When she finished gathering information, she called everyone together in the living room. These beings you've encountered, they're known by many names, she began, her voice serious but reassuring. Some call them the Watchers, others refer to them as shadow spirits. Whatever name you use, they're ancient and powerful. They feed on fear and chaos, using animals or people as vessels to interact with our world. Karen frowned, shaking her head. But why would they target my family? Why Max? That's the question we need to answer, Dr. Grant replied. It's possible they were drawn here by something specific, a disturbance, a weakness in the veil between worlds. Or perhaps your family has ties to this land that make you vulnerable. Her words sent a chill through the room. No one spoke for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. So, what do we do now? He asked. Doctor, Grant smiled faintly. We prepare. We fortify your home, strengthen your defenses, and learn how to fight back. Because if I'm right, this isn't over yet. With her guidance, the Harpers and their friends began implementing new protective measures. Salt lines were reinforced, charms hung above doorways, and rituals performed regularly to ward off unwanted visitors. Slowly but surely, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. But everyone remained vigilant, knowing that peace was fragile and shadows could return at any moment. For Ethan, the weight of responsibility was heavy, but he faced it head-on. He vowed to protect his family no matter the cost. And as autumn deepened, bringing colder nights and longer shadows, he kept watch, ready to confront whatever darkness might emerge. Winter came to Willow Creek, blanketing the town in a soft layer of snow. The days grew shorter and the nights colder, but inside the Harper household, there was a sense of cautious optimism. Life had slowly begun to feel normal again, or as normal as it could be after everything they had been through. Max was back to his playful self, often chasing balls or curling up beside Lily, who seemed to smile more each day. Karen and David worked hard to keep things lighthearted, organizing movie nights and baking cookies to fill the house with warmth and laughter. But Ethan couldn't let his guard down. Even though weeks had passed without any sign of the Watchers, he knew better than to believe they were truly gone. Dr. Emily Grant had warned them that these entities were patient, capable of waiting months or even years before striking again. They thrived on unpredictability, feeding off fear and chaos whenever they sensed vulnerability. Every night before bed, Ethan checked the salt lines around the windows and doors, ensuring no gaps remained. He also lit protective candles in every room, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Jake visited regularly, bringing updates from his own research into folklore and supernatural phenomena. Together, they studied old texts and practiced rituals, determined to stay one step ahead of whatever might come next. Despite all their precautions, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. They had fortified the house and learned how to defend themselves, but he still didn't fully understand why the Watchers had targeted their family in the first place. What made them special? What connection did they have to this ancient force? One evening, while flipping through the Harper family journal for what felt like the 100th time, Ethan stumbled upon a section he hadn't noticed before. It was tucked away near the back, almost hidden beneath layers of handwritten notes and newspaper clippings. The entry was dated over a century ago and written in delicate cursive, June 14th, 1893. Strange occurrences continue to plague our town. Father believes we are cursed due to our ancestors' involvement in summoning the Watchers. He says they were once called upon to protect us during times of great hardship, but now they see us as enemies. We must sever all ties with them, if we wish to survive. Ethan's heart raced as he read the words aloud to Jake, who had just arrived with a bag of snacks. "Do you think this means what I think it means?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling slightly. Jake frowned, leaning closer to examine the page. "You mean, your family actually summoned these things?" "It looks that way," Ethan replied, running a hand through his hair. "If my ancestors brought them here, maybe that's why they're still hanging around. Maybe they think we owe them something." The realization hit both boys like a punch to the gut. If the Harpers were connected to the Watchers through bloodline or history, then simply defending themselves wouldn't be enough. They needed to break the link completely, and that meant confronting the past head-on. Determined to find answers, Ethan reached out to Dr. Grant, explaining what he had discovered. She agreed to meet them in the woods where they had encountered the Watchers weeks earlier. Armed with flashlights, salt, and the leather-bound book of rituals, Ethan, Jake, and Dr. Grant ventured into the forest under the cover of darkness. The air was icy, and the ground crunched beneath their boots as they trudged through the snow-covered landscape. The trees stood tall and silent, their bare branches stretching toward the starless sky. When they reached the oak tree with the carved symbols, Dr. Grant instructed them to form a circle around it. "This is where the connection began," she said, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "And this is where it will end, if we do this right." She opened her satchel and pulled out several items: a bundle of dried herbs, a vial of water collected from a sacred spring, and a small knife used for ceremonial purposes. Handing the knife to Ethan, she explained the ritual step by step. "You'll need to cut your palm and allow your blood to mix with the elements. Your family's bond with the Watchers runs deep, so only someone of your lineage can sever it." Ethan hesitated, gripping the knife tightly. He glanced at Jake, who gave him an encouraging nod, and then at Dr. Grant, whose steady gaze reassured him. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the blade against his palm, wincing as a thin line of blood appeared. He squeezed his hand over the pile of herbs, letting droplets fall onto the mixture. Dr. Grant added the sacred water and began chanting in a language neither boy recognized. The words flowed smoothly, filling the air with a rhythmic cadence that seemed to echo through the trees. As she spoke, the symbols carved into the oak tree began to glow faintly, pulsating with an otherworldly light. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply. Frost spread across the ground and the wind picked up, carrying whispers that sounded like voices overlapping in confusion. Shadows emerged from the trees, swirling around the group like smoke. Their glowing eyes locked onto Ethan, burning with anger and hunger. "Stay focused," Dr. Grant shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Finish the ritual." Ethan nodded, repeating the chant she had taught him. His voice wavered at first, but as he continued, it grew stronger, blending with hers, until the two became one. The shadows writhed violently, screeching in protest as the light from the symbols intensified. One by one, the figures dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind only silence. When the last shadow vanished, the glowing symbols faded, and the forest returned to its usual stillness. Ethan exhaled deeply, clutching his injured hand. Blood seeped between his fingers, but he barely noticed. All he could think about was the weight that had lifted, not just from his shoulders, but from the entire family. "Well done," Dr. Grant said, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You've done what many thought impossible." On the way home, Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. While he was glad the immediate threat was gone, he couldn't help but wonder if the Watchers would ever truly disappear. Had they severed the connection permanently, or merely delayed the inevitable? Back at the house, Karen and David greeted them with worried expressions, having heard about the plan secondhand from Lily. But when Ethan explained what had happened, their faces softened with gratitude. For the first time in months, the tension in the air seemed to lift, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. Over the following weeks, life in Willow Creek settled into a routine. Max played fetch in the backyard, Lily laughed with her friends at school, and Karen baked pies for the neighbors. But Ethan and Jake remained vigilant, continuing to study protective measures and document any unusual activity. They never forgot the lessons they had learned, that the world held mysteries beyond comprehension, and sometimes, even the most ordinary moments could hide extraordinary dangers. As spring approached, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land, Ethan sat on the porch with Max lying at his feet. He watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Despite everything, he felt a quiet determination settle within him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he wasn't alone. His family, his friends, and even Max would stand by his side. For now, the shadows were gone. But Ethan understood that peace was fleeting, and the unknown always lingered just beyond the edge of sight. And when the time came, as it inevitably would, he would be ready. Spring arrived in Willow Creek, bringing with it longer days and warmer weather. The snow melted away, revealing patches of green grass poking through the soil. Birds returned to the trees, filling the mornings with cheerful chirping, and the neighborhood came alive with children playing outside after school. It seemed like the kind of season where everything could finally feel normal again. For Ethan Harper, though, normal was a word he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. The ritual in the woods had worked, or at least that's what everyone hoped. Since that night, there hadn't been any signs of the Watchers. No shadowy figures lurking outside their windows. No strange noises echoing through the house late at night. Max acted like his old self, wagging his tail and bounding around the yard without a trace of the tension that had once gripped him. Lily laughed more freely now, her fear slowly fading as time passed. Karen and David even began talking about taking a family vacation, something they hadn't considered since before the attack. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were living on borrowed time. He didn't say it out loud, not to his parents, not to Jake, not even to Dr. Grant, but deep down he knew the Watchers weren't gone forever. They were patient, cunning, and relentless. If history was any indication, they would wait until the Harpers let their guard down before striking again, so Ethan stayed vigilant. Every evening he walked the perimeter of the house, checking the salt lines and making sure the protective charms hung securely above every door and window. He kept candles lit in each room, their flickering flames casting shadows that danced across the walls. Sometimes he sat in the attic, flipping through the Harper family journal or reading passages from the leather-bound book of rituals. Even when nothing happened, he reminded himself that preparation was key. One Friday afternoon, after finishing his homework, Ethan decided to take Max for a walk around the block. It was something they used to do together all the time, but lately, he'd avoided it, fearing another encounter with the Watchers. Today, however, he felt compelled to step outside, to remind himself that life could still be simple, even if only for a little while. As they strolled down the quiet streets, Ethan noticed how peaceful everything seemed. Neighbors waved hello. From their porches, kids rode bikes along the sidewalks, and the scent of freshly cut grass lingered in the air. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to relax, letting the rhythm of their footsteps lull him into a rare state of calm. Then Max stopped, abruptly, his ears perking up. His body stiffened, and he growled low in his throat, staring intently at the line of trees bordering the road. Ethan froze, gripping the leash tightly. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, shining the flashlight toward the trees. At first, he saw nothing but shadows cast by the setting sun. But then movement, a faint shimmer like heat rising off asphalt. Shapes began to form, humanoid and indistinct, their glowing eyes piercing through the dim light. Ethan's heart raced as he recognized them instantly. The Watchers. "Not again," he muttered under his breath, backing away slowly. He pulled Max close, whispering reassurances to keep the dog calm. The figures didn't approach right away. Instead, they hovered near the tree line, watching silently. Their presence was suffocating, pressing against Ethan's chest like a weight he couldn't escape. Ethan knew he couldn't fight them alone. He needed help, and fast. Pulling out his phone, he sent a quick text to Jake. "They're back. Meet me at my house ASAP." Within minutes, Jake arrived carrying a backpack filled with supplies, salt, candles, and the ritual book. Together, they hurried back home, keeping a wary eye on the shadows trailing behind them. Once inside, they barricaded the doors and windows, reinforcing the salt lines and lighting protective candles throughout the house. Karen and David were confused and alarmed by the sudden activity. "What's going on?" Karen asked, clutching Lily protectively. "It's the Watchers," Ethan explained quickly. "They're back." Dr. Grant arrived soon after, having been alerted by Jake. She wasted no time getting to work, instructing everyone to gather in the living room while she prepared another ritual. This time she focused on strengthening the barriers around the house, rather than confronting the entities directly. "We can't afford to engage them tonight," she said, firmly. "Our priority is keeping your family safe. Once we reinforce the protections, we'll have time to plan our next move." As she chanted, the air grew heavy, and the candles burned brighter, their flames turning blue at the tips. Outside, the shadows pressed closer, their glowing eyes visible through the windows. But they couldn't cross the threshold, not yet. When the ritual was complete, Dr. Grant turned to Ethan. "You did the right thing by calling us. These beings are testing you, probing for weaknesses. Don't give them an opening." The rest of the night passed in tense silence. Ethan took turns staying awake with Jake, keeping watch over the house. By morning, the shadows had retreated, disappearing into the forest as mysteriously as they had appeared. Over the next few days, Ethan, Jake, and Dr. Grant worked tirelessly to strengthen their defenses. They expanded the salt lines to cover the entire property, hung additional charms above every entrance, and performed daily rituals to maintain the protective barrier. Ethan also spent hours researching ways to permanently banish the Watchers, determined to find a solution that wouldn't require constant vigilance. Their efforts paid off, at least temporarily. Life returned to its cautious routine with no further sightings of the Watchers. But Ethan knew better than to let his guard down. He continued studying the Harper family journal, searching for clues about why the Watchers had targeted them, specifically. One entry caught his attention. April 3rd, 1922. Father believes the Watchers seek to reclaim what was promised to them long ago, Our bloodline holds the key, though none know exactly what that means. Until we uncover the truth, we must remain vigilant. Ethan frowned, rereading the passage several times. What did it mean? What promise had been made to the Watchers, and how was his family connected to it? Determined to find answers, he reached out to Dr. Grant, sharing the new discovery. "This confirms what I suspected," she said thoughtfully. "Your ancestors made a pact with these entities, likely during a time of desperation. When the Watchers fulfilled their part of the bargain, they expected something in return. Your family's refusal to honor the agreement has angered them, which is why they continue to haunt you. So what do we do?" Ethan asked. "How do we break the cycle?" Dr. Grant hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "We need to confront the source, the place where the original pact was made. Only then can we hope to sever the connection permanently." After some discussion, they decided to search for the location mentioned in the journal. According to the entries, it was a hidden grove deep within the woods, marked by ancient stones arranged in a circle. Armed with flashlights, supplies, and unwavering determination, Ethan, Jake, and Dr. Grant set out to find it. The journey was difficult, requiring them to navigate dense underbrush and steep inclines, but eventually they stumbled upon the grove, a clearing surrounded by towering oak trees, their branches intertwined like cathedral arches. At the center stood a ring of moss-covered stones, etched with faded symbols identical to those carved into the tree near Willow Creek. "This is it," Dr. Grant said, her voice hushed with reverence. "This is where it all began." Together, they performed one final ritual, using elements tied to the Harper family: soil from their backyard, water from the spring near their house, and a lock of hair from each member of the family. As Ethan recited the chant, the symbols on the stones glowed brightly, pulsating with energy. The air crackled and a deafening roar echoed through the forest as the Watchers materialized, screaming in anger and defiance. But this time, Ethan didn't falter. With Jake and Dr. Grant beside him, he held his ground, pouring every ounce of strength into the ritual. Slowly but surely, the shadows began to dissolve, their forms unraveling like threads pulled from fabric. When the last figure vanished, the grove fell silent, bathed in the golden light of sunset. Back home, the Harpers celebrated cautiously, grateful for the newfound peace. Ethan knew the Watchers might never truly disappear. They were forces older than time itself, but for now the threat was neutralized. And as he sat on the porch with Max curled up at his feet, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, savoring the quiet moments. Life wasn't perfect, and perhaps it never would be. But Ethan had learned that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about facing fear head-on, no matter how overwhelming it felt. With his family by his side, he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.